of all, I have to take just a moment to acknowledge our event that we put on yesterday, the Welcome Home Vietnam Veterans event. Thank you. It was an amazing, amazing night. But one of the things that was probably the most special for me, not only honoring these men and women that served our country so faithfully, was the fact that I looked out in the crowd and I would see some of my church family. Thank you to those of you that showed up to volunteer. We had many, and I didn't get to stop and talk to every single one, but as I walked through the crowd, it was such a comfort to look up and to see someone from our church there to help, to volunteer, and honestly, to just be part of welcoming these men home, men and women home. Last year when we did this event, we probably honored about 500 Vietnam veterans. This year it was just as crowded, if not slightly more. And I just assumed that a lot of them are repeats from the year before. And when I asked how many had not been there last year, that this was their first time, I would guess that maybe 80% raised their hand. So that means that collectively between last year and this year, we probably had the honor of welcoming home close to 1,000 Vietnam veterans and changing their lives, honestly. In doing this, I hear a lot of stories of healing, wholeness. Kind of a theme that I would hear from these Vietnam veterans is that this is the first time in their life that they're stepping out from the shadows, because they had to hide the fact that they had served. They had to come home and change out of their uniforms. They were spit on. They were called horrible names. And it was just a very tragic, divisive time in our country's history. And the honor of this event was, or the theme of this event was to honor, heal, and educate. And I think we were able to accomplish all of that. And the stories I've heard of healing are just, they're still coming in. In fact, the next phase of what I'm doing with Welcome Home is I'm starting a campaign called Your Story Matters. And I'll be sitting one-on-one with Vietnam veterans, having coffee, hearing their story, getting some photographs, and starting to document their journey, because their story does matter. So thank you for being a part of it, Valley Friends. I appreciate it so much. We have a quick video. I want moms in the house to see if you can relate, or the rest of you see if you can relate, because maybe your moms said these things to you. this, I can't help but remember one time my mom got mad at my sister and I. Her famous thing to say was that she was going to slap us into next week. And I still can't quite figure that out.
Right?
Or if I'd ask her
right?
for something, she'd say, I'll give it to you the second Tuesday of next week. Second Tuesday of next week. Anyway, all these crazy things. Well, one time my sister and I were fighting, and my mom decided that she was going to run away. Have there been any moms in here that have run away? And I remember being horrified that my mom was actually running away. She just took off walking. She wasn't going to go far. But I remember these two scraggly little skinny kids. I was skinny at one time. Momhood changed that. Anyway, I'm running down the street. We're screaming at my mother, Mommy, come back. We're sorry. And I remember really thinking at that moment that I would never run away from my kids. Who does that? Well, then I had a 16-year-old son. And I remember clearly one night we got in a big fight. I don't even remember what he said, but he said something that was, I just felt very degraded, just disrespected. And I just snapped. And I said, I won't even repeat what I said because you'd never invite me up here again. But I said something really bad that I never thought would come out of my mouth. And then I was well, first of all, it stopped my son in his tracks. He was stomping up the stairs, and I said my thing. And he's like, oh, Mom. And I'm like, yeah, you heard it. And then guess what I did? I ran away. I took off. I got in my car. Well, then my son could drive. He had a truck. And he's like, Mom, come back. And I'm like, leave me alone. And we're just... So I'm thinking of this, like the things that we say we'll never do or never say, we actually do when you become a parent. And my son chased me. I'd come up to a stop sign. He'd come up, roll the window down. Mom, come home. I'm like, leave me alone. I'd take off. He'd come up and say, we did this all around the neighborhood. I didn't go out of the neighborhood. I just needed to run away for a minute. So, yeah, being a mom is tough, you guys. It is tough. I want to talk to you about some of the women, first of all, in the Bible. We're going to talk about a few women, but, you know, there's a lot of women in the Bible who have sacrificed so much. And to me, when you hear the word mother, automatically you need to attach the word sacrifice to it. A mom has a sacrificial heart. A woman that mothers has a sacrificial heart. You can't pour into someone else without sacrificing something of yourself. It's a trade-off. And sometimes it comes naturally. Sometimes we have to work at it. Sometimes we really struggle because we're selfish and we're prideful and we want to hang on to our time and do things our way. But mothering means we give up. We give up something of ourselves to pour into somebody else. All through the Bible, there are so many women. I mean, there are books on women of the Bible, and every one of them has a sacrificial story. But I think of, you know, Eve. Let's start with Eve. She was the first woman in the Bible to actually bury a child. What about Jochebed, who had to save her son by wrapping him and putting him in a basket and putting him in the Nile River and sending him down the river, not knowing what the outcome was going to be? Or what about a woman named Rizpah? Her story fascinates me, but she was the mother of two of King Saul's sons. They were killed. They were murdered for the sins of their father, and they were hung. They weren't even buried. They were hung on a cliff, side of a cliff. And Rizpah stood vigil all through the harvest season, purely to fight away the vultures so that they wouldn't eat their bodies until they could be given a proper death. You talk about sacrifice. And then what about Mary? Mary, of course, not only did she risk potential persecution, shame for being an unwed teenage mom, but then she had to actually watch her son die a criminal's death for you and I. It's amazing the sacrifices that are made all throughout Scripture. But I want to focus a little bit on Naomi. Naomi was such an amazing woman in the Bible for many reasons. You know, not only was she sacrificing for her own family, but she ended up sacrificing for those that weren't even her blood relatives. You know, Naomi, it started out, they were living in the promised land and a famine hit. And so Naomi's husband says, we're moving. We're going to move over to Moab. We're going to go to greener pastures, so to speak. Could you imagine, this is your home, and now you're told that you're going to be moving to a foreign land, and you're going to walk away from everything you know. family, from friends, from livelihood, and you're just going to go into this foreign land where they worship other gods. They were just going into unknown territory. But Naomi sacrificed in order to help provide for their family and to honor her husband. So they get over to Moab, and then the two sons, decide that they're going to marry Moabite women. So they get married, but shortly after that, Naomi's husband dies. So now she doesn't have her husband, but she's in a foreign land. She's got two sons, and then they have wives, and she now has responsibility. What does she do? For 10 years, she lived there in a foreign land and tried to keep, I'm sure, things stable. But more importantly, what I feel like Naomi did, and we can see that later on by Ruth's response to her, is I think Naomi was pouring into these young women. For 10 years, she nurtured and she taught, and I'm sure they poured into each other's lives. And then Naomi's sons die. So now it's just Naomi and these two daughter-in-laws. And what was she supposed to do now? She has no family, blood relatives, but she's got these two women that she has the opportunity to keep pouring into. Naomi gets word that things are better back home. And when Naomi left Bethlehem to go to Moab, she was full. But see, Naomi, there was a point in her journey that all of a sudden her journey kind of changed her identity. See, Naomi means pleasant, but when she came back, she asked the women of the town to call her Mara, which meant bitter. Her journey changed her identity for just a moment. Really cool thing, though, she asked these two women, or the two women started, her daughter-in-law started with her on this journey, but at some point she realized that this probably wasn't the best thing for them, and she asked them to go back, that she had nothing to offer. She was empty now. One ended up going back, Orpah. The other, as we know, Ruth, begged her to let her go with her. What was it about Naomi that then Ruth was willing to leave her family, to leave all that she knew, and to travel with this woman to a foreign land? Now she was going the other way. I want you to turn really quickly to Ruth chapter 1, if you have your Bibles. And as Naomi is begging Ruth to go back and to just let her go alone, Ruth says to her, "Don't ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us." And when Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she said nothing more. Why would she do that? To me, what that tells me is that Naomi was pouring into Ruth, and Ruth saw something in her that she was drawn to. The phrase that stands out to me is, "Your God will be my God." So Ruth was even seeing characteristics and seeing God lived out in Naomi's life, even in the midst of her bitterness. And on this journey, they ended up going together. It was 30 miles, and we think 30 miles, no big deal. It is for me, but usually 30 miles, that doesn't sound that far. But you guys, these weren't paved roads. There were no street lights. The roads were dirty and dusty, and could you imagine the darkness? I don't camp a lot. I'm not much of a camper, but I hear that in the mountains, it's darker than dark, that you can't sometimes see your hands in front of your face. And here are these two women out there alone on this journey, and you can imagine how dangerous it was for them. And then there's one point in their journey that they have to kind of scale a small mountain of 2,000 feet to make it over to the other side. And can you imagine? I want you to picture the journey. What do you think the conversations were? It took them about 2 weeks to get there. What did they talk about? And can you imagine the moments that Naomi wanted to just give up? Because she was still feeling empty. It wasn't like she got a burst of energy and said, "Whoo, God is good. All is well." She was still on her journey back. And so you know that Ruth must have been beside her along the way and poured into her. And there may have been times that Ruth had second thoughts. What am I doing, leaving what I know? But something in her drew her to Naomi. There was mentoring. There was investment of 10 years plus. And that's what led her to go home with Naomi. And as you know, the two of them ended up allowing God to turn it around, and Ruth ends up becoming a part of the lineage of Jesus himself. God took this difficult journey, and he brought good out of it. And that's what he does with our journeys. Our journeys are messy and difficult, whether we're moms or we're not moms, or what about the way our moms mothered us? It's not always the traditional leave it to beaver, June Cleaver style of mothering, right? But yet Naomi was obedient, and Ruth and Naomi both were blessed. Also, I want to tell you a story about a woman by the name of Ann Jarvis. Ann Jarvis was a PK. She was a preacher's kid. She grew up in the church. She taught Sunday school for many, many years. And when she grew older, she decided to become a social activist. And she had between 11 and 14 children. God bless her, right? Between 11 and 14 children. Only 4 survived. The rest died of measles, diphtheria, all kinds of diseases. So she decided that she wanted to begin these Mother's Day groups. And these Mother's Day groups were going to be used to teach women how to raise children and teach them hygiene, proper hygiene, and just how to avoid diseases. And she ended up growing. These groups started to grow. And then the Civil War broke out. And when Virginia split, and there was the West Virginia and Virginia, all of a sudden the Civil War was going on, and she decided that these groups had to shift their focus, not so much on moms helping with disease and helping to teach these moms, but instead to care for the wounded. And so as that happened, she decided to take a neutral stance because she wanted to bring people together. As the Civil War ended, she ended up changing her focus and created a Mother Friendship Day. And the purpose was to bring the North and the South together, the enemies, so to speak, together with their moms in church and create an event where they could come together. And at first there was this tension on the first day that they did it. There was this tension that happened. But little by little, as they prayed together and fellowshiped together, broke bread together, that these reconciliations started to happen in her community. Her daughter, one of the 4 surviving children, her daughter watched her. She watched her faithfulness. She watched her sacrificial heart, and she heard the prayers of her mom. Her mom dreamed of someday having a day that was focused just on moms and the sacrifices that they make. Her daughter's name was Anna Jarvis, and when her mother died in 1905, Anna decided to really push that and try to create a special day just for moms. She got her wish. Mother's Day was established, but then something happened. Mother's Day was meant to be a church day, to go to church, for kids to take their parents or go with their parents to church, and for children to write letters to their parents. Well, commercialism took over, and all of a sudden the greeting cards took over, and the flower business took over, and Anna was so disgusted by the commercialism of this that she fought the rest of her life trying to get Mother's Day off the calendar and to get rid of it because it had gone so far away from what her original plan was, which was to honor the sacrifice of moms. And for children, she even said, there's a quote from her, that buying a greeting card is the lazy way of trying to communicate, because she wanted handwritten letters. But Mother's Day, what we know today, is here because of Ann Jarvis and her daughter Anna Jarvis, really pushing for this cause for mothers to be recognized. I take it a little bit farther. I want to tell you about my mom and my mom's journey. What I've realized is that the journey isn't easy, and we are so quick to judge others, to judge ourselves, to judge our moms by what we think the norm is supposed to be. We get offended, we get disappointed, we get discouraged, and we have this litmus test somehow that our moms are supposed to be this, and when they don't, especially on Mother's Day, things like this, we can't help but think, well, my mom did this, but she didn't do that. She did this, but she didn't do that. And we start giving a scorecard on our moms. Or we give scorecards on ourselves. I could think of a million things that I would have done differently now that I have grown adult children. But wherever I feel that I missed something, wherever there was a gap in my mothering, I know God filled that in. But it took a lot for me to figure that out. I judged myself every day, and I still fight it. I'm fighting it this morning. I fight it all the time. But my mom, God bless her, this is my mom. She was 15 here, and this was actually her last year in school. She quit when she was in 10th grade. Her mother had 4 children, and her mother's mother, my grandmother, was dying of cancer, and she needed to go take care of her. And so when she did, she took her 4 children and she dispersed them with different relatives in the family. And my grandmother was gone for about a year. And while she was gone, my mom was abused, beaten by her paternal grandfather. She was raped by a neighbor. She had no direction, no instruction, other than just getting hit with a razor strap that sharpens razors. That's what he would beat her with. My grandmother comes back after a year. My mother doesn't even know who her mother is at this point or where she's at. She must have been gone actually a little bit more than a year. But my mom was being told that her mother had died, when in fact her mother had tried to come back and get her, but the grandfather would not turn her over unless she paid a bunch of money. And my grandmother didn't have the money. The laws didn't protect children like they do today. And so my mother stayed, and my grandmother would go hide and watch her play on the playground just to know that she was okay. Fast forward, the paternal grandfather dies. They send my mom to go live with her actual maternal grandfather, who was in and out of prison, and he was abusive. He was an alcoholic, and he beat her, and he was abusive. So at 15 years old, my mom met this handsome young man, my father, and whisked her away and married her at 15 years old, had me when she was 17, and life continued. We moved to Okinawa. My dad was in the service, and we had my sister. I was 5 years old, and while my mom was over in Okinawa, she could not help but feel like she had a mom out there somewhere, that her mom really wasn't dead, that she was alive. And so she opened the newspaper one day, and she saw an article about a soldier that had found his long-lost mother by writing an article in the newspaper. And so she thought, well, if he did, maybe I could do that too. So randomly, she writes this letter to the editor in some small town in North Carolina where she thought my grandmother may have lived at some time. Some woman, a friend, an older woman in a nearby town, saw the article, called my grandmother, whose name was Ivory, and said, Ivory, there's an article in the newspaper, and I think it might be about you. And sure enough, it was. And the newspaper and the military raised the funds, got the funds together, and sent my mother and I from Okinawa to North Carolina to be reunited with her mom. Happily ever after, right? You would think so. But instead, we go back to Okinawa. My mom and dad end up getting divorced. My mom brings my sister and I back to the States, and then life as a single mom on welfare, and all. It was just a really bad season. It just got worse. So, purpose of telling you this, let me fast forward just a little bit, because then I became a mom. And I expected that my mom was going to do everything that for my grandchildren, for her children, that I thought she should have done for me. I set so many expectations for her as a grandma because I wanted to put everything that I missed as a child on my children. Like, okay, she didn't do it for me, she's going to do it for them. And I was let down over and over and over. But you guys, there came a time in my life where I realized that I had to stop measuring my mom by my expectations. I needed to instead honor my mom's journey. My mom never had a mother. She had 2 men that beat her. And then a man that cheated on her. And Men just were not, it was not a good combination, my mom. But yet, I was measuring her with expectations and not considering my mother's journey. And so I was left disappointed. And so as a child growing up, I was very rebellious. I was angry. I knew my mom loved me, but I wanted the life that I thought everybody else had. I compared my life with everybody. And we didn't have that good old-fashioned family experience. After I had my kids, I remember feeling one day in prayer, I had just come out of a Bible study, and I remember God saying to me that I needed to go to my mom and ask forgiveness. And I'm like, what in the world do I have to ask forgiveness for? I didn't do it. She's the one that didn't measure up. She's the one that wasn't Mother of the Year material. It was her. But God reminded me that was her journey, and my job was to honor her journey. That she did the best she knew how to do. She did the best that by intuition she loved us. It just wasn't ever going to look like a traditional family. And so I had to ask forgiveness for not honoring her journey. And so I took her to lunch one day, and I went kind of, guns loaded, as they say. I wanted to tell her all the reasons why I was so frustrated all these years, and all the reasons why she disappointed me, and all the reasons why my heart was broken because of this and that. But when I sat down, I thought, all I have to do is apologize for not honoring her. And then when I did, this amazing thing happens. When we're obedient to God, it's incredible what happens. All of a sudden, she looked at me and said, I need to ask your forgiveness. I wasn't the mom that you wanted or deserved. I wasn't the grandma that you deserved. Now I'm really crying because I didn't have to tell her anything. I didn't have to tell her anything that upset me. It was, Mom, forgive me. And then she asked for forgiveness back. And in that instant, God created this healing space for us to really grow into our mother-daughter relationship. Little did I know that a year later she would die of cancer at 59 years old. And I could have missed it, you guys. I could have missed it. I could have been so hung up on my entitlement, what I was supposed to get as a child, and measuring my mom by somebody else's standard, instead of saying my mom's journey that God didn't cause, but God allowed this journey. At the end of the day, he chose her as the vessel to bring me into this world. It's not about our mom's performance. It's not about what our moms did or didn't do. It's the fact that your mom is chosen. She was chosen. You would not be sitting in this chair today if it had not been your mom that God chose, regardless of the circumstances. And that's what today is about. Mother's Day is not to honor ourselves. It's not to evaluate whether we're a mom, whether we got to be a mom, not a mom. It's not about that. It's about honoring the very vessel that God used to bring you into the world. And we all can identify to that. We are to honor our mothers and fathers. There's a reason for that. But it doesn't say honor them based on this. It's honoring them. Number one, it's a command. And number two, it's because that's who God chose to bring you into existence. Every single one of you have a mom. Whether your mom has gone before you, has already gone, whether your mom, you speak to your mom or not, whether you have an amazing, wonderful family life and great memories with your mom, or whether your mom left a void in your heart. God is the one that fills in those gaps. And I don't want you to miss that. Mother's Day can be hard, but it doesn't have to be. Honor your moms. Honor their journey. Learn from their mistakes. Live out their legacy. And make this a day of celebration for who God chose to birth you and bring you into this world. Let's pray. God, there's just so much to say about moms and mothering and the art of mothering and, God, mentoring and grafting our hearts to other people's hearts, God, to bring new life into others. Father, help us not to get so hung up on right and wrong and good moms, bad moms, absent moms, or micromanaging moms. Lord, just help us to just put all that aside and to thank you, Lord, because we would not be here today if it weren't for the women that you chose to bring us into this world. God, your word tells us that we have a purpose and a plan for our lives. Let us not act based on how we were raised. Let us act by who we are as believers. God, just weave your DNA in and through us and help us to have your heart. Help us to love the unlovable. Help us to forgive when it's hard to forgive. Help us to forgive when there are people in our lives that don't even ask for forgiveness or know that they need it. God, help us to find new and creative ways to love our moms. Help us, God, to go back to the original purpose of Mother's Day. Anna Jarvis writing letters, writing notes, writing cards to our moms. Help us make it personal. And then, Lord, for the moms that are in this room today, God, I'm just asking that you would help them to see their identity in you. Lord, that they would not see their journey as their identity, but they would see themselves as your beloved. They are enough, as Pastor Joe mentioned earlier, God. They're enough because of you. I just ask that if any of you in this room with all eyes closed and heads bowed, if you haven't entered into that personal relationship with Jesus, don't let today pass by. Whether you have a mother or a father or you don't, let God come into your heart and to fill those empty spaces. Don't leave today and miss that opportunity. And for those of you that need to ask forgiveness or to give forgiveness, don't let this Mother's Day pass. If I had waited a short time, I would have missed it. And I'm so grateful I did. So use this time to just forgive in your heart or to ask forgiveness or to just honor the memory of your mom. God, we give the glory and the praise to you, and we thank you for our moms on this day.